All right, so here we are starting with chapter 12, which is going to talk primarily about kind of social and cultural reform that existed in the antebellum period. So basically, the four chapters that are going to be part of this test cover the same time frame. So we're going roughly 1830 to about 1860. Sorry, 1830 to about 1860. Um, Not right up to the Civil War because the next chapter is going to kind of cover the build up to the Civil War. But mostly here we're talking about social adjustments and changes that happened during these time periods. Chapter 9 talked all about Jackson and his presidency and what that meant for the country. Chapter 10 was all about economic development. 11 and 12 talk about kind of social change and development um, in the in both the South in chapter 11 and then more focused on the North here in chapter 12. Our test again will be Wednesday. I'm going to have 3 videos for this stuff here in chapter 12. It's still hopefully will be relatively short, but again. This is kind of some I think it's kind of interesting stuff, but you probably won't as much. We talk about a lot of stuff like transcendentalism here, which I know from um, freshman year English. You did a lot on transcendentalism, which I'm thankful for because we can cover it more quickly and you understand it. But it is at the same time, kind of like boring stuff. But I want to make some connections between it and things in more modern society too. So that's enough with that. We will just we'll go on from there. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay. So again, as promised, first we're going to talk a little bit about transcendentalist ideology. Okay. Um, and when we're talking about transcendentalism, again, the root word here is transcend. People during this time are trying to transcend their existence in some way or another. And I'm sure you remember a lot of this from freshman year. Look, the transcendentalist movement is the result of a lot of things. In part, it's a response to industrialization in the early 19th century. It's also kind of a after effect of the Enlightenment where kind of a new generation of people are taking their own perspectives on the Enlightenment ideologies of previous generations and turning that into something that more is representative of them and their generation. So hopefully that makes sense. It's largely based on this concept and spirit of what we call romanticism. Romanticism, not in terms of like romance, like relationships between people, um, but more of a romanticism in the sense that being reminiscent. It's a response, really. The whole romanticism movement or transcendentalism, whatever they're kind of connected. Um, as a response to industrialization, right? Because as people see the world around them kind of changing and modernizing, becoming something different, we begin to hold more dearly to the things that maybe existed before. You yearn to go back to those times. It's like when people are nostalgic about things from their youth that they hang on to for a long time because it brings them good memories, right? Maybe it's a toy that you had when you were a kid, or a game, or some article of clothing that's really important. You're kind of romantic about that in the sense that it means something to you uh, because of kind of the images and memories that it conjures up. And that's kind of the sense of what we're talking about here and how different um, concepts of romanticism existed in America during this time. And it's largely through the arts, okay? Um, we see it through schools of painting. So we're going to talk a little bit about painting here, and I'll show you a couple images of some paintings in the next slide. But the school of painting is called the Hudson River School. Now, it's not actually a school specifically, like not a school building. Um, you have different like schools of thought, In America, you have different schools of painters. And basically, it's a group of painters that made paintings that had some sort of similar imagery or something to them that reminded them of whatever it might be. Now, this Hudson River School is focused largely on transcendent and romantic imagery. You know, basically, um, the imagery of the Hudson River School paintings, and listen close here. So it speaks to man's humanity with nature. Okay, basically exposing a distrust of the human world, um, and how people need to seek nature as a source of fulfillment for them. Uh, it's a byproduct of industrialization. Again, you know, we keep talking about industrialization here. I'll write that down. When people see industry grow, they become afraid that the society that they once knew is somehow going to be gone. So we see a lot of these painters, Asher Durand, Thomas Cole, Fred Church. They were the biggest names in there, Durand, Cole, and Church. Paint these images that have both kind of religious imagery to them as well as imagery that conjures up nature, because people are afraid that as industrialization continues, these beautiful images of nature are going to be gone, replaced by cities and factories and all the stuff that comes with it. So it's a way to connect with nature around people. So hopefully that makes sense. I know it's kind of confusing and weird. The other thing that we see is for the first time, you know, kind of a real generation of what we call an American literature. Okay, a couple chapters ago, chapter 10, we were talking about how American culture has not really defined itself as anything being unique to America. The authors people read are British authors or European authors. A lot of the activities we enjoy are things that were enjoyed from Europe. One thing we do start to see during this era is a series of authors, American authors, that are writing about, you know, American experiences, American things, which is kind of the first time. Let me get rid of this real quick. That are kind of writing for the first time about American stories and American things, and something that people can identify with as wholly and uniquely American. Imagine you reading a book, like a modern book. You know, I don't know how much you read, but if it's like James Patterson, you connect with the story because it features American characters. If it's a story that features foreign characters, whether they're European or wherever, if it's the same type of story, maybe you don't connect with it as much, right? So having an American literature is really important to people. And people write different ways. The most famous names there are Walt Whitman, Edgar Allan Poe, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry David Thoreau. You know, and these are all romantic authors. I know you think Edgar Allan Poe, what's romantic about his stories? It's not so much that his stories are particularly romantic, but they speak to a time, and they're genuinely American in many ways in their characterization. Walt Whitman, as a poet, writes so much about the beauty of being an individual and discovering yourself and being able to transcend. That's what makes him kind of such a transcendent writer. You know, authors like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Thoreau speak about man, you know, finding their place in the world and finding their relationship with nature, particularly Emerson. You know, that's very important. You know, you transcend nature by having a developed relationship with it as a person, right? Henry David Thoreau is, you know, the first person to really have a discourse on what we call civil disobedience. What this movement really is like a 19th century version of the 1960s, and kind of like the counterculture hippie movement that we see in the 1960s, except it's 100 or so years earlier. These people don't like America as they see it at this time, so they're trying to find new ways to express kind of um, you know, to kind of express how they're different than everybody else and how they're special, right? Um, Stressing, particularly in the case of Emerson and Thoreau, is that individuality. Well, I guess Walt Whitman would fall in there too. So we're really valuing the individual here and the sort of things that these people bring. Other authors that you would include in this list would be like Nathaniel Hawthorne, who wrote The Scarlet Letter, The House of Seven Gables, and several other books. He writes romantic stories that talk largely about times in American history's past, colonial times or whatever. Most notably, The Scarlet Letter is kind of a call out to the Salem witch trials, and how you get labeled, social labeling, and something of that nature. So there you go. I hope that rambling kind of made sense. I know this is kind of weird stuff and hard to explain, but hopefully that made sense to you. A couple questions to answer, and I did talk about them earlier in the notes here, right? Careful about the word romanticism, right? What is it that makes these stories or these things romantic? Where is the romance there? Is it romance in terms of relationship, or are we talking about romance in terms of something else, right? And what role does nature play in this whole transcendentalist movement in regards to the individual? So these are two questions I want you to answer to show me that you watch this. Shoot me an email with a couple, kind of brief responses to that if you could. All right, so moving on. Here is one of the famous painting of the Hudson River School. This is Thomas Cole's Oxbow, the Connecticut River. Again, all it is a painting of a river oxbow where it turns around, kind of. The story, the thought behind this, right, is he's capturing the serenity and beauty of nature, of the land that surrounds him. Again, in part because of the fear that with industrialization and with the constantly changing country, that may not be around forever. There may be railroads that go over this, or they may cut into it with a canal, or whatever might be the case. Maybe also a little bit, this is really kind of thinking deeper. Maybe these people also see things as with more immigrants moving in, so and how that might change the society in a negative way. So you're talking about a little bit of nativism, maybe part of it too. I'm not saying that's the case, but maybe it affects people's mindsets during this time. Okay, something else to think about. Asher Durand, Kindred Spirits, right? Here's another image. You see these images, it's just two men out there looking, and enjoying the beauty of God's creation, right? Of the you see the kind of the skies here, and it's beautiful, and the sun is coming down upon them, and you've got like the creek or the river down there, and everything else. People trying to continue to kind of appreciate the world that exists around them. So there's kind of some imagery here, just trying to capture that and keep that for the times, right? Okay, so the other thing I'm going to talk about today is kind of a little strange. What we start to see in the 1840s in particular, well, a little bit earlier than that, in the 1830s too, are people with kind of ideologies that promote kind of concepts of a new society. And largely, what we're talking about here are utopian communities. In the 1800s, in the midst of industrialization, people want to establish and create what they think of as a utopian community, where everybody finds equality and everybody can find a place within that society. It's another offshoot of this transcendentalist movement. And, again, an after effect of enlightenment. People are looking at the world around them in a different way. And one of the ways they begin to look at is, how can we create this perfect society, right? How can we create what maybe John Winthrop maybe meant when he talked about the shining city upon a hill? So there's a lot of different attempts at a utopian society, and largely they fail. Okay, One example is Brook Farm. The Brook Farm community was started by a man named George Ripley in Massachusetts. I forget exactly when, but the idea of Brook Farm was that that people could take would basically take the money they had and invest in this Brook Farm thing, and everybody pools everything together, and they would operate it as a farm, and then everybody would kind of break up um, all the profits from the farm kind of equally, and everybody would enjoy the benefits at the same level from the successes of the farm, right? And it's not just a small farm; it's just this concept of this community farm. Uh, Everybody would kind of live there-ish, and everybody would work together to build a great society. Now, it's a nice idea, but at the end, it's not going to work. You have bad harvests. You have people that maybe lack farming skill. You have people that work harder than others that naturally creates problems within the community. You have bad money management. All these kinds of problems cause the failure of Brook Farm. Okay, it's a concept, where we see these communal living arrangements is what this is. Okay, this is what we call a communal living arrangement, kind of like a cult in a way. Everybody lives together, everybody works together, and you try to achieve a common end, right? Everybody works together towards achieving that goal. Everybody shares the same things to avoid any sense of competition between people. Everybody depends on one another, for support and all that sort of thing. Great idea, not realistic. Okay. Another example is the New Harmony community that was started in Indiana by Robert Owen. In fact, they're still in Indiana, like I think Southwest Indiana. I think there's still the town of New Harmony, Indiana. And that was founded by an industrialist by the name of Robert Owen, who wanted to start these utopian communities in the United States, where basically he took his wealth. He was a wealthy industrialist, and he took his wealth and created a society and invited people to come live there, where everything would be paid for, and there would be kind of like an ideology that people would be expected to follow, like a doctrine or something like that. And people would come there, and would all kind of just immediately come in and find a place to work in and help build and maintain this community. Well, the problem is, basically it's a big sign that says free stuff, okay? And so all the people come in, vagrants, lazy people, people that don't want to work, and within a couple of years, New Harmony fails as well, okay? These societal visions, if you pay attention to them, they are quite similar in many ways to communist ideology. And that's no coincidence. It's around this time that, Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, at least mid 19th century, write the Communist Manifesto. Okay, the whole goal of these movements is to help people achieve self-realization. But again, they don't really work, and within a couple short years, they both fail. There's other attempts at these kind of communal living arrangements where we see kind of gender roles being redefined in communities. One of them is this thing called the Oneida community in New York, upstate New York. I've actually been in Oneida, New York, kind of randomly as I was driving through a few years ago. I think it was that weird then, but so this Oneida community was basically this really strange idea where everybody in the community would kind of live together, not like one house, but everybody would kind of come together in this community, and everything would be shared, even families. So there would be no real families. It would be like children within this community would be raised by the community rather than their actual parents. In fact, oftentimes they had very little contact with their birth parents, as there would be people in the community that would kind of do the child raising for them. There was lots of free love and stuff like that in these types of communities. So sometimes you get an unwanted pregnancy, and the child would be born, and the parents are like, yeah, I really don't want it. So then the child would kind of just go to the community, and interested people in the community would take up the responsibility of raising the children. So really kind of weird. Takes away individual responsibility, and everything is kind of like a collective responsibility. They actually survived for a while. I think of as far as like the 1870s, until people were kind of like, yeah, this really isn't working, and it's kind of weird, and just with many, just like a lot of other utopian type communities, it fizzles out eventually. Another weird one were the Shakers. So the Shakers actually had a presence in the Dayton area. If you ever up in like Greene County, if you ever go on like Shakertown Road, that's where the Shakers were from. In fact, where Bergamo is, right across the street from there, I think the land now that's owned by like Reynolds and Reynolds used to be a Shaker community. In fact, I think there's an Ohio historical marker there that says, oh, this is where the Shakers were. And the Shakers were this group of women, basically, this group of like religious women who kind of had these really weird practices, and they called them Shakers because you would see these women at their religious gatherings, and they'd be really like frantic, and they'd be like shaking their bodies because they believed that they could shake the sins off of their bodies through these frantic religious experiences. So again, another example of like a weird religious practice that again were popular during this era. Probably the most successful of any of these different utopian society ideologies were, of course, the Mormons. Now, the Mormons, kind of confusing. We know they all live in like Utah now. So Mormonism began, back in like the 1830s, and it grew a lot of popularity. Mormons believe that Jesus Christ actually came back to earth already and is essentially walking among us, and is going to reveal himself. It's part of what the Mormon belief is. And basically, their founder, Joseph Smith, was a polygamist. Now, polygamist is somebody who takes many wives, but it is a bit of a misconception because, of course, the Mormons still exist today. It's a bit of a misconception that Mormons are polygamists. Joseph Smith was, and people didn't like that. Eventually, he was arrested for polygamy, and an angry mob basically came to the jail, broke in, and killed him. And because of like the problems that the Mormons were causing, making a lot of people angry and stuff like that, the government basically said, why don't you guys just move somewhere else, okay? They were a much larger group than any of these other kind of religious ideas or groups. The Mormons were large and significant enough that, they had a lot of followers. So basically, their next in command was a guy named Brigham Young, and the government basically says, why don't you guys you take your Mormons and move out west, and you can have Utah. It wasn't called Utah yet, but they gave them this land out west and said, bring all your people with you and form your society however you want to out there. And that is how Mormonism kind of was formed and has managed to survive and thrive to a certain degree, where all these other kind of social experiments really fail. All right, so that is all I have for this one. Still went a little bit longer than I thought. Again, if you have any questions about any of this, please let me know. All right, talk to you later.